Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Talking City podcast from the Manchester Evening News. I'm Tyrone, Marshall, hosting today, joined by Simon Bajkowski. Joe Bray is not available today. He is apparently en route from New York to Orlando, although on Facebook he's posted a selfie with Mickey Mouse, so believe what you will for his absence. Instead, you'll have to make do with me and Si in Manchester, in glorious, sunny Manchester. I can't believe New York would ever have it this good. Simon, how are you doing and how was your weekend?
Yeah, good. It was quite a peaceful weekend, really. It feels like the calm before the storm that is coming, that is the Premier League, and it's back and it's bigger and better than ever, and the Champions League and all that, which is to come, because the Community Shield really isn't very far away now. So it's yeah, you cannot complain when the sun is out, can you? Which means that we've not been able to complain on about 3 days this year.
Absolutely, which is probably for the best, knowing journalists. We do like to complain, so hopefully it'll start raining soon and we can get back to complaining, because that's much more my wheelhouse, to be honest, in this gig. Talking of the calm before the storm, that brings us nicely, I guess, to Manchester City's transfer window, and these pre-season friendlies can be interesting for what goes on the pitch. Although when you're changing kits at half time, it does kind of tell you how seriously some of these games are being taken. Manchester United and Arsenal playing on the same night and having a penalty shootout at the end of the game, even though Arsenal won. I think some of this might be being done for the American audience, believe it or not, rather than what the clubs might say. But probably the most interesting thing from City is the stuff that was said post-match, and some illuminating comments all round, really. We'll start on Pep's future. He's spoken about his future again, and very interesting comments, I would say. When I'm leaving, I will say I'm leaving, but I didn't say that. We'll see what happens. I will not rule out it absolutely to extend my contract. I would love to stay because I would love to stay. I mean, where are we with this story and Pep's contract? I think we spoke about the end of last season, a few of his comments being misinterpreted, but it does kind of feel like he's in and out, and it's doing the hokey cokey, and maybe even Pep doesn't really know at the moment whether he wants to stay or not beyond the end of this season.
No, I think where we are is, not to blow our trumpets, but kind of where we've been reporting that we are, which is that he's still expected to leave at the end of next season, at the end of this season, 2025. But he might not. He's not made a decision yet. And it was obviously reported at the end of the last season that this is expected to be his last season. But it might not. And I feel like, Guardiola will often respond to how things are perceived to be. And I think, all the reporting that this is set to be his last season, he's maybe saying, whoa, just because I said I'm closer to leaving than I was staying doesn't mean I'm off, or I'm off now. And, he's been linked with the England job, hasn't he? Which is available now. And people say, oh, is he going to be off now? And he's saying, no, I'm not going to be here for another 8 years, but I'm going to be here for another year. And who knows, I might be here for another year. There are a lot of fans who sort of took to his comments about him being motivated to be here, and I'll see how the players are, if they're still responding to me, as real positive signs that he could stay. And he could, but it's what he said throughout, and it's what he will say throughout. And he knows he's got a decision to make, and he knows that he is closer to leaving than staying, because it is hard every year to keep going and motivate yourself, and especially with the intensity that he works at and the increasing match calendar that he's been a vocal critic of. Does he want to stick around as it gets worse and worse and worse? Has he got the energy to stick around as it gets worse and worse and worse? So, I mean, pre-season's always an easy time because he's just had a rest and he feels energized and rejuvenated. But it feels like, the status quo still remains. He probably will leave, but he might not.
And the status quo is going to remain in place until he does make a decision. And I think he started his answer here with, "When I'm leaving, I will say I'm leaving," but I didn't say that. And we don't really know when he's going to say anything, but it's going to remain probably the biggest story in City's orbit until he does make a decision. And it's a story after a pre-season friendly against AC Milan. It's going to come up in almost every press conference for the first few months of the season, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's a case of finding people are going to find new ways to ask him about it. Pep's going to keep delivering roughly the same answer, although we know he does occasionally kind of change how he frames an answer, and we have been around there before where it's been misinterpreted. But I guess it's kind of going to be the story that City just can't get away from at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, we've said it before about various things, but like away games, you get people who that's their one chance a season to ask Pep Guardiola a question. Champions League games, it's their one chance a season. He's going to get asked, "Are you staying? Have you made a decision?" Um, Nigh on every week. And because as well, as soon as results come into it, well, have you lost that game today, Pep? Because there's uncertainty around your future and so uncertainty around the players' future, and they don't know what's going on. And it might be complete rubbish on that day, or it might not, but the question is going to get asked regardless. I think, yeah, it's probably going to be like October, November is usually when he makes a decision. And then, whether that is broadcast immediately or whether they wait until they've maybe lined someone up as they did when they landed Pep, or just sort of a bit later down the line. We will see, but certainly for the first few months of the season, everybody's going to be asking about it.
Yeah, and he always says that the most important thing is, are the players still responding to him? Because it is a long time, especially in the modern era, for a manager to be there, and players can become bored of the same voice. So if his most important, or one of the most important issues next season is how are the players responding to him, it's obviously going to be October, November, when he's got a better grasp of how this season is panning out, and what sort of messages the players are getting, how they are responding. And talking of responding to messages and people who may or may not be here next season, the Ederson saga rumbles on. A narrative that fit neatly the other night when he made maybe two minor mistakes for the first couple of goals. I guess shots he perhaps should have saved, perhaps could have saved. Ones that Ortega maybe would have saved. It fit nicely into that discussion about a number one goalkeeper at the moment. And then Pep said after the game about how much he would love Eddie to stay. Ederson did Brazilian TV and was kind of very vague about his future, how it hasn't been decided yet. But it's great to hear that from Pep and how much he's loved working with him. It was a bit of a mutual loving, but it doesn't necessarily change anything, I guess, with where we're at. And the story, it kind of felt like this story was dead a week or so ago, and now there's been new interest from another Saudi team who are maybe more willing to push the envelope when it comes to a fee, and we're back in that territory of kind of just waiting and seeing what happens.
Yeah, it's always interesting when players stop in the mix zone, isn't it? And especially when they don't need to stop in the mix zone, and especially when, in Ederson's case, they rarely, if ever, stop in the mix zone. He was speaking to Fred Caldera, who works for TNT, who is, we can attest, one of the loveliest journalists you can meet, and he knows Ederson very well. So if Ederson was going to speak, then Fred would probably be on his towards the top, if not at the top of his list of people who he would want to speak to. But still interesting for him to come out and say, "Yep, it's in God's hands. We will see what happens," because that is speak for. Yeah, I'd quite like to leave. It was quite interesting on the City TV coverage when David James was asked about Pep's comments on Ederson, saying we would really like him to stay and whatever, and David James was like, "Oh no, oh no, that's not good." Kind of, yeah, fueling this idea that he very well might be off.
Mm.
I'm not sure he will be off. I don't think he will be off, but that's more because I don't think Al Ittihad will come up with the money that City want for Ederson. But it is going to have to be, if that is the case, then Ederson's going to have to sort of be happy with where he is and put in the performances that keep him in the team and keep Stefan Ortega out of the team. But he's not ideal, I would say, for such uncertainty around your number one goalkeeper.
No, and like I say, it is fueling this debate among fans of whether Ortega should be the number one, whether Ederson stays or goes. And I'm sorry to disappoint Ederson as well, but it's perhaps not in God's hands, but it's in fact in the hands of some very rich people in Saudi Arabia and quite how much money they want to pay. But like I say, it's the one area of the pitch you kind of don't want that uncertainty, and City are lucky in that it feels like they will be very happy going into next season with Ortega as the number one. But if Ederson does go, there's going to be a sign in there, whatever, isn't there?
I've said it before, but in my view, if you lose Ederson, then you're downgrading your number one and you're downgrading your number two. Because Ortega is the best number two they could hope for, but he can't quite do what Ederson does, and he has other skills and he's better than Ederson in other areas. But I think overall, Ederson is better. And yeah, I mean, who knows whether he wasn't quite on it against AC Milan because that's not his wheelhouse, or because he had a young, inexperienced defence with people playing out of position. The midfielder Sissoko, who was at right back and got caught for the first two goals, or whether there's some uncertainty because of what's going on in the wider picture. And it's like I was just saying about with Pep and his contract. We read into these things where there might be nothing to read into, but the fact that Ederson has this uncertainty around him, and uncertainty can affect your performance, is something that City are going to have to think about. I mean, you would expect that Ortega plays the Community Shield because he does tend to play in those kind of games, and if he plays well, and if there is still this uncertainty going into Chelsea on the first game of the season, it's a big question for City whether they pick Ederson or not.
Yeah, definitely.
But also, like, Ederson can end it. Ederson can end the speculation and say, "No, I'm happy here. I'm staying here," and that will be the end of that. But he's not doing that. He's actively not doing that. So you can read into what he wants.
The vagueness of his answer to Fred would probably suggest that he is fairly open to this move happening, I would suggest, because like you say, if he wasn't, he would just end it and say, "I'm staying here." And the other thing around Ortega, I guess, is he has been brilliant for City, but his career trajectory is so unusual in that he spent the vast majority of his career in Germany's second division. He played 2 seasons in the top flight for Arminia Bielefeld. I mean, if he goes to number one for City, he has never played a season under that pressure before in his life. And as good as he's been when called upon last season, he did make a mistake in the cup final. He was a bit rash in the cup final. He certainly looks the part, but he's never had a full season of being a first choice for a goalkeeper like City with that pressure, because frankly, he's played for 2 pretty small clubs in Germany.
Yeah, and his star had never been higher at City in the cup final. He was coming off that incredible stop at Spurs that won them the league. Ederson had been ruled out, so he was number one, and people were saying, "Yeah, this guy's better than Ederson." And then he starts in the cup final, and costs or plays his part in costing City the win. So as good as he's been for City, he still has questions to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned before as well whether Pep has got the energy to go again with the schedule even busier this year. The Club World Cup, in theory, next summer, although who knows what's happening with that. And Pep has been banging the drum again this weekend about player welfare and the number of games players have to play, with the stark suggestion that players are going to die, which, I mean, you wouldn't want to rule out, to be honest. I mean, it is absolutely relentless. And he was talking about how he would like to have more of his, I was going to say star names. I mean, the star names for the fans, but essentially more of his first team available on this tour. They're strange tours, aren't they, this year, in that they're essentially not really doing the team any good. And it's the same for every club, really, because a lot of the players that you want to get those patterns going with just aren't there and aren't going to be there until the week before the Community Shield. So it's a difficult tour and a more pointless tour, I guess, for that. It's obviously for commercial gain, you're always going to do it. Players are getting their chance, but it's not ideal not having the players available. But they've got to have a rest because the calendar is absolutely relentless. And the City player who's been most vocal about that is Rodri. He is enjoying a very well earned break because he never gets one otherwise, does he?
No, I thought it was really interesting. Erling Haaland speaking in New York and saying he was watching the Euros and thinking these players look knackered. These players look really, really tired. And as much as Haaland would dearly love to play his part in taking Norway to a major tournament, he was pretty happy to be on the beach while these players were slogging the guts out. And, obviously not the cheeriest to say that players are going to die from the fixture list, but everyone is noticing it as a real issue. And City are kind of doing what they can in terms of giving players extra rest this summer, as they tend to do. But then you've also, from what Guardiola was saying, which is, again, what we've been writing, but it feels a bit more official when Pep says it, like there's no Rodri sort of cover riding in to rescue him. It seems like, there might be, but it's not like City are chasing it and will not rest in this transfer window until they've found some cover for Rodri. So it might not happen. And in which case, yeah, it's difficult because they're not. It's all right resting players, but City have got a small squad. Do you take Rodri out of another 10 games, or do you sign players? But is the answer to these problems that you just sign loads of players? Is that what is good for football? I'm not sure it is. Do you bring through academy players, but the expectation is so high? It's really difficult. And you say about the tours this year, yeah, they're difficult. And what happens to the tours next year for City? Because for the whole time that the Euros were on this year, they're in the Club World Cup next year. And so do they have a rest? Do they go on tour after that? Do they, you think they can't give up a tour, but then they literally won't have a squad. So there are a lot of things that are bubbling away. And if we're talking about themes of the season, then burnout is going to be that as well, sort of as soon as the Champions League starts up.
Yeah, definitely, especially with those extra group games in the Champions League and going on till January. That's all for the first part of the Talking City podcast. We'll be back after the break to look at a few of the star performers from the Milan game and maybe a few who didn't quite do themselves justice. Welcome back. Manchester City 2, AC Milan 3 then in New York. Let's start with a young player who is probably pushing his case this pre-season. These tours after a major tournament are always an opportunity for young players, and someone who is taking their chances is Oscar Bobb. He's having a pretty good summer. He was very lively against AC Milan, some good moments that seem to attract the interest of social media and the short clips these days, some nifty footwork, and he's doing his cause no harm this summer, isn't he?
Yeah, he's looked the best player. He's looked really, really good, and he looked good last season when he was used, and he took all of his opportunities. He was kind of better than I think they hoped he would be, and was the main reason that in this sort of weird world they could say that they didn't miss Cole Palmer, because whenever they needed Oscar Bobb stepped up. And as good as Palmer was at Chelsea, they were like, well, we've got this guy who's doing really well. And yeah, he's another one who's had a full summer of rest because Norway weren't in the Euros. And yeah, he's looked like their best player. He's outshone everyone else. And, it's not a full strength team, but there are first team players in there. And if you picking a team based on what he's done or how the players have performed on pre-season, then Bob's probably your first name on the team sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do we think going to happen with him this season? I guess you've got Savio in there now, adding to that competition. Bob had his moments last year, didn't play an awful lot. You know, it's where does he go from here? How much football do we expect him to play this year? What does this season maybe hold for him?
Well, that's it. That's the question. You would expect him to play more, and I feel like he's at that point now where sort of Palmer was in his early days at City, where like you have to play him if he plays that good. If he's standing out in a team with players around him, like he's outperformed Jack Grealish over these last two games. So if you're picking the team for Chelsea on the first game of the season, do you play Bob or do you play Grealish? Like it probably comes down to what you want, but Bob has played better than Grealish. So, Guardiola's system is based on meritocracy, and if you play well, you deserve to play again. So I think if Bob isn't used very much in the early stages, I think he's got real reason to be aggrieved because as young as he is, he's doing really well, and it's perfect to sort of ease Savinho in if Bob is there doing what he's done. And yeah, Celtic, AC Milan, not the strongest, but he's at that point where everyone he plays against, he seems to do well against, and a bit like Palmer with England coming on in the Euros. So it feels like he's going to be a big part of the early matches, and then go from there.
Do we think what happened with Cole Palmer will maybe condition City's thinking with Bob, maybe convince Guardiola to give him more minutes? I know that Guardiola and City have said they've no regrets over Palmer. They got a good deal. I don't think anyone saw him doing what he did last season, both for Chelsea and then for England. But there's no doubt on those performances, he could have been a key part of this City squad. They don't want the same thing to happen with Oscar Bob, do they? And while there's no suggestion he's going to go this summer, if he has a season where he's very much on the fringes, it could certainly be something that rears its head last summer, and then they won't want to lose another young player that then just leaves the club and goes on to another level, will they? They've done it once with Palmer, and while you're winning the league, it's not really an issue, but you don't want it to happen again, do you?
No, I think the issue is not this year, but next year. Because Oscar spoke last week, I think, and sort of said, to play under Pep Guardiola is a dream. If I have to be patient, then so be it. But like, look what happened with Phil Foden, and Guardiola is the best manager in the world. I had no thoughts of leaving, so absolutely fine for this year. But next year, if Guardiola goes and if Bob has not played the minutes that he wants, then next summer he's probably thinking, yeah, I have two reasons for leaving that are much bigger than they were last year. So I think they've got to be careful in integrating him. I think it'd be easier in the sense that Palmer had kind of like 18 months of frustration on the sidelines, kind of injury and form. So he was more conditioned to leave because of that, whereas Bob's had a year of, playing more minutes than he probably expected. But they do have to keep an eye on it, and like I say, be aware of what may happen next year.
Yeah, and from someone who's caught the eye on pre-season, then to someone who is having a bit of a nightmare, Calvin Phillips, poor Calvin.
It's painful, isn't it?
It is painful. Yeah, I don't think there was any chance of him resurrecting his City career, but it's just the poor guy just can't catch a break, can he? And he just looks totally shot every time he pulls on a City shirt, whichever whether it's a first half shirt or a second half shirt. It's just a nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. He started the first game and was pulled off after 45 minutes, and Pep said, "Oh, he's coming back from injury." Didn't start the second game. Came on in the second game, and it was just really bad. Like booting the ball out of play, losing possession in his own third, just looking like completely lost. And the sad thing for me was like seeing clips of him going around social media, and like City fans laughing and West Ham fans laughing, and like he's at that kind of Harry Maguire point for me, where every game he plays, something is going to get clipped up and shared to be laughed at.
Yeah,
And, no, it's not nice for anyone in the career, but you just feel like Phillips needs to get out of City. But every game he plays, you think there's less chance of someone saying, I like what I see there, I'm going to come in for that. Like Everton are sort of interested, but I doubt they'd be able to get a permanent deal. And there's a few others, but it doesn't feel like, it feels like with every, if he was sent on tour to sort of remind people of what he can do, that the opposite has been true.
yeah, definitely. I mean, like you say, any club wanting to sign him now are doing it on the basis of his Leeds form and I guess his England form from a few years ago, aren't they? Because his spell at West Ham was a disaster. His return to City has been a disaster, and he looks like he needs a fresh start. And you've got to have sympathy with him with the way things are going. But City need him gone, and he needs to be out of City and permanently. You would suggest rather than a loan, just to give him this fresh start.
Yeah, because the thing was like as mad as it sounded, like even Gareth Southgate said during the
I
Euros,
know.
like we're missing Calvin, and with City not making major efforts to sign Rodri Covey, you think, well, it sounds strange, but if Phillips could give himself like a little boost on pre-season, then maybe he could step into that role that he was always meant to have. But these games have just reminded you, like, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think Gareth Southgate said we're missing a Calvin Phillips, which is probably even worse for Calvin Phillips that it wasn't Calvin Phillips. But yeah, it's hard to sort of reconcile that player that was so good at Leeds and the star of, or one of the stars of 2021 Euros, and I think he won England's Player of the Year that year. And I mean,
Yeah,
he just looks so far away from it now, and it is a shame to see. And you hope he can get that fresh start for everyone's chance, really. Who else from the game then caught your eye or didn't catch your eye? Haaland took his goal pretty well. I thought the second goal from McAtee was really nicely worked and a decent move. Who particularly impressed or otherwise?
yeah. I mean, do we need to speak about Pep? It's 3 losses in a row now.
That's
Counting
it.
the
Maybe
FA
there won't
Cup
be a new
final.
contract there. Withdraw that offer.
Precisely. Yeah,
It's
it'll
not
be
your decision to make, Pep.
no. Maybe those will be the questions. I look forward to the first person to asking him that. 4 defeats in a row, Pep. Any concerns? Um, Yeah, Erling Haaland looked pretty good. It's now sort of 2 goals and a header in the first game and a sort of well taken goal in the second. McAtee remains an interesting one. Obviously he's fighting to be in the squad for this season. It feels like this is his last chance to really grasp it. And I didn't feel like he played that well, but then his goal and like that header at the back post was quite Gundu and like just popping up when you need him, using his intelligence. And you wonder whether things like that will be enough for Pep to say, yeah, I need that in my squad this year,
Yeah,
especially with the extra games. Grealish still pretty. I think Pep was asked about him and he said step by step. Which tells you, yeah, things are starting a bit slowly. We had a lot of Grealish posting himself working out or running during England games this summer, sort of talking about or building expectations towards a big start to the season, and it's not really happened yet for him.
no, and it's undoubtedly, we've touched on it already, but it's a big season for Grealish, isn't it? And like I say, he did seem to be working hard in pre-season and a lot of running photos rather than bars in Ibiza, which is a promising sign. But like we say, it is a big summer for him, and he needs to get going from the start then. So City done in New York, the New York leg of their tour over. They seem to have made a bit of an impression in the Big Apple, training in Central Park. The locals seemed pretty charmed. The Yankee Stadium seemed to have far more City fans than AC Milan fans, despite the Italian connections in New York.
Yeah, it looked really fun, didn't it? Training in
Mm,
Central Park.
yeah, it
It
did.
looked like proper way to ingratiate yourselves, I suppose. And they've got this pop up store and You know, they had this event there and Pep playing basketball and Grealish playing basketball, and like kids in tears to see Jack Grealish and see Erling Haaland, which is, nice to see. Happy tears, of course, but kind of a reminder of, the superstar effect that you can get, and to see sort of like Zlatan Ibrahimovic asking for Haaland's shirt is a sign of, what a giant of the game Haaland already is. And yeah, full house in New York. It seemed like it went down very well. City will target New York because it's New York. It's this, enormous metropolis and so much appetite for sport. And they've obviously got New York City FC. But yeah, Guardiola's commented about how many more City shirts there are these days when you go around, and if you can do it in a place like New York, that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, 100%. I was in New York with United on their preseason tour last year, and there was nothing, in terms of training in Central Park and things like that. It's almost like that's a club just kind of taking it for granted now, where you see City are still putting the work in, aren't they? They're putting this groundwork in to build up that worldwide supporter base. And when you go to America and you see all those City shirts, you see all those City fans overseas, it is a sign of that this isn't just going to blow itself out. The City fans here for generations to come, aren't they, all over the world?
Yeah, and the last time they're in New York, they trained at New York City's training ground in Orangeburg, which is about like 40-50 minute drive in an Uber out of Manhattan, and it was perfect conditions for them, I suppose, because it's a spitting image of the CFA in Manchester, but it didn't feel like they were kind of taking on the city.
Yeah.
Whereas here they were like, they're pop-up stores at the Rockefeller Center, and they clearly pitching up to New York saying, we are a big deal, come and see why. And they've had deals with like WWE, and they've just announced this collaboration with Sony Pictures to like create kids TV shows and football shows, and Pep's been in Ted Lasso, and Man City have been in that for 3 seasons, and so they're really trying to make as many inroads in America as they can. They're obviously there next summer for the Club World Cup on the East Coast again, I think. So yeah, it seems to be working.
Yeah, absolutely. And on to leg 3 next, Orlando. Barcelona on Wednesday night, early hours of Thursday UK time. Anything from that game you're particularly interested in, apart from whether City can end this disastrous losing streak?
Yes, yeah. I think it'll be probably too early for someone like
Yeah.
Gundogan to be back for Barcelona, and Ferran Torres, and any of the old boys. Will João Cancelo turn up, be sort of in a Barcelona shirt, trying to push his way towards the door? No, I think we can expect a lot of love from Guardiola towards his team, and Guardiola and Kovacic will be expected to play more. I think it has been a really inexperienced side. Not so much at the top of the team, but in defence and midfield. I think if you put Guardiola in at centre back, say, and Kovacic in front of him as a 6, City will look a lot more like City and not be conceding so many of the goals that they have been so far. So I think if we see that, then Pep might save his job.
Absolutely. Under pressure at the moment. The odds are shortening in the next manager to be sacked market. We'll be back with everything and under pressure Pep Guardiola has to say before that game. We'll have all the live coverage for you from Orlando, and we'll be back for a podcast later in the week. It'll be Simon and Joe at some point, I believe, when Joe is back and settled somewhere in a hotel on America's west coast. I'll be off by then on holiday in Portugal, so I will listen by the pool perhaps. But that's all today. Thank you for your time, Simon, and we'll be back speaking to you later in the week. Do leave a review. Remember to like and subscribe to get the latest podcasts in your feed as well.